Hi, Anita and Ryan, my personal best coaching and creator of the Up System. In a continuing theme here in this training video, I want to take a look at another case study and just pull it apart for you. And I want to zone in on a particular aspect of performance, namely performance anxiety. So we're going to continue with the theme of increasing productivity and performance by at least 35 to 85%. Whilst reducing stress and burnout, but I really want to zone in on this because it's an aspect of performance that is a key complaint by a lot of people where they come unstuck. And I'm going to go a little bit lateral on you and take my analogy from the sports field and a young girl of 10 years of age, because I want to pull out certain things in this case study which will uniquely come through in this case study, and I want you to transfer that across into your particular zone, your particular field, your particular role or task. Okay, so I don't apologize for going into the sports arena to pull this out. Now let's just, before we go into that, have a look at some of the key aspects and factors of performance anxiety. And without going into an anatomy lesson here on you, just underline a few key things here, hopefully that you're familiar with. But the first thing to underline is that in performance you need a certain amount of adrenaline pumping in order to perform well. If you're flat or you feel nothing, usually that will result in underperformance too. And I don't want to confuse flatness with composure. There is a difference, okay? But normally what happens in performance anxiety is that too much adrenaline flows and you get the racing of the heart and the sweaty palms. In fact, the symptoms will vary from person to person. Not everybody will get those symptoms. It will show up in different ways for people depending on your constitution and a whole variety of other factors. And I want to underline from that the fact that people will experience differing symptoms. I want to underline how multidimensional you really are. You know, anxiety doesn't just affect us physically, it affects us mentally, it affects us emotionally, it affects us spiritually and at a soul level if you want to, really embrace those dimensions too. Okay, so bear that in mind. It's not just happening on one level. But what happens is you get this excess flow of anxiety and fear, which are very powerful emotions, which will impact the body, meaning that you lose control over one or more aspects of your mind and body. And that's going to be unique to you. That results in a loss of composure, which is absolutely essential for optimal performance. And on the physical level, that can result in underextension or overextension in terms of physical expression as a result of muscles contracting. Either somebody sort of ends up, falling short in the way that they extend, which is underextension, or they make up for the feeling of contraction and tension by really overplaying a particular action. And depending on what results in performance, whether it's underperformance or a complete belly flop and a disastrous performance, it can end up in social withdrawal, for example, particularly whether there's a very public and competitive element. And there's a whole load of things that can start to play out in the mind as well. The mind can go into a very defensive mode, or it can go into a mode of ownership depending on your level of evolution and your own personal growth. But these are just some of the things. So with that in mind, let's just take a look at this particular case study. Now, this was a 10-year-old Charlotte, and just to give you some context, it was actually her mother that approached me, because Charlotte is somebody that represents Great Britain in a former Olympic event called tumbling. It's a gym event. And you can Google or look up tumbling on YouTube and you'll see some demonstrations where they run down a 25 to 30 yard plank, so to speak, or a pathway, and perform various types of flips in quick succession. And they have to get certain types of flips in. They have to achieve certain degree of accurate accuracy, and they also have to do it in a very composed and controlled and a balanced way. And so it was Charlotte's mum who approached me. So that was the level that Charlotte was performing at international level. And she used to be frequently getting medals at the international events, and she had lost medal status due to this thing called performance anxiety. Not only that, now I will say that her problems were mainly at the international events. She fared better at the regional events, so it was very specific to the international events. And it's important to be able to identify where the problems lie, because it's not always a black and white issue. You know, in this case, it was clearly that the higher the stakes were, the higher the increase in anxiety. So it was very specific to the big international and national competitions. Now, the other thing was that she was losing control over her bodily functions. So, you know, in a very acute anxiety situations, particularly when it starts to translate into fear, you can start to lose control over your elimination system, which is to do with the bowels and the urinary tract system. And this was the case for Charlotte, which was really highly embarrassing for her, and, you know, a complete loss of dignity. But she was up against her peers as well, many of whom she attended school with. So there was an added social layer. And she also was spraining and hurting her hand in training. In fact, at one point she fractured her wrist. So this was the degree of loss of control over her body as a result of acute performance anxiety. In fact, it was more veering towards fear. She'd also socially withdrawn, because it was her mother who actually sought me out for help. And I had to really go through a process of, if you like, smoking her out of her corner, so to speak, and getting her to open up so that I could help her. But her mother was watching. You know, her parents attended these events with her, and of course, to the degree that she was highly anxious or otherwise, it would affect the whole family experience at these events. So really the tension and the fear had a knock-on effect. Now, the point was that Charlotte was really at the point of quitting, which is quite an extreme thing. This is how she felt. And this was the cumulative effect of all the things I just described as symptoms. She wasn't enjoying herself anymore. It really was having a damaging effect. And for a 10-year-old girl to be going through that, it was really quite serious for her. Now, what she didn't tell me at the time was that the next international event was coming up, or the national event that was coming up next was in 2 weeks' time. So we were really against the clock. And in truth, I didn't know what we could achieve in 2 weeks, because there are so many variables that go into performance that are down to the person themselves, and how quickly they can really engage successfully with the drills and the skills. But I wasn't governed by that 2-week timeline, because we were after a long-term result as well. So that was the presenting issue. Okay, let's look at the system that I took Charlotte through. And again, as with all my clients, I take them through this threefold system, this 3-point strategic system that revolves around 3 areas: align, accelerate, and accomplish. And for those who may be watching this for the first time and seeing the system for the first time, just to remind you about what those areas are about. And I draw them out here as interconnecting hubs, because they all interconnect with each other, but I'm going to go through them one at a time. So in alignment, I really kind of scan and check alignment with self, for example. How well are you working with yourself? How much are you in partnership with yourself? And that's not just a theoretical thing, but by partnership, I'm looking at the harmony. How in harmony are you with yourself? And people commonly relate to this in terms of self-esteem. And Self-esteem is really, really important when it comes to performance, because if you don't like yourself sufficiently, if you don't believe in yourself sufficiently, in your ability, and notice I say the word sufficiently, this isn't about perfection. This is about having sufficient quantities of things. But if you're not in alignment with yourself, it's going to affect your performance. Self-esteem will really impact performance. And I was dealing with a young lady here who really had lost confidence, more so than self-esteem, but that lost confidence was impacting on her self-esteem a lot. So I look at the alignment with self-esteem as one thing. Also look at your alignment with your thinking. How accurately do you reflect? Not just on yourself, but in this case on your performance. A lot of people reflect very inaccurately on performance, and in fact I used to as well. And I used the tool that I give my clients very, very effectively to powerful impact when I used to play as a footballer. So look at the alignment with your thinking, accurate reflection. Also look at your alignment with learning. Now, this impacts some more than others, because where people have to pass certain competency tests that involve knowledge, this is going to come more to the fore than others. But in any sort of learning, particularly if you're going through my coaching system, where you have to consume new knowledge or tweak knowledge that you've been taught erroneously, okay, then the capacity to learn in a way that's brain-based will really speed up that process of becoming competent. And most people don't know how to learn properly. We're taught subjects rather than how to learn. And then looking at how well you're aligned with your performance. How well are you aligned with good practice in performance? And this is another area of erroneous teaching. And I'm going to demonstrate this in a moment with this particular young lady on one aspect of her performance that she was given instruction on. And also look at health, alignment with health, because health is huge when it comes to performance, and it's an integral part of you and your feeling of well-being, and it will impact your self-esteem. So everything is interconnected. And so if you're out of alignment, it's really going to impact performance. And I look at helping people to realign depending on where they're manifesting the biggest misalignment problems. And acceleration is those things which, when you be and do, really add to a sense of momentum and progress and speed up the process of results. And by the way, just by aligning yourself with those areas I've mentioned, it will of necessity just start to give you an acceleration without doing anything else. But there are things that we look at to really push you through the gears here so that you can get momentum. And acceleration is not about hard work, and that's going to feel very unfair to people who were brought up with a hard work ethic, including myself. But one of the harsh realities of hard work is it doesn't always mean results or effective results. So I really look at the difference between hard work and smart work, and it's really, really important to learn to use your inner resources in a smart way. So we look at the inner aspects of accelerating forward, which is all about integrating your inner resources, but also look at the things that you surround yourself on the outside that when you do will really help to accelerate your performance as well and what you're able to accomplish. And so on to accomplishment, one of the things that really help people understand is that there's a difference between activity and accomplishment. So you can be highly active in everything that you're trying to do in the way that you practice things, and yet that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to accomplish in accordance with that activity. And again, that's harsh reality. There's lots of people that are very high on effort, which is a very noble thing, but you know, volume of effort does not mean that you're going to accomplish what you set out to do. And the whole objective of this system is to turn you into an accomplished performer. So those are the three hub areas, and I really want to take a look at a couple of spinal points that I attempted to cover with this young lady. Now, for those of you who know me, you'll know that I like talking about spinal points, because if you think about the spine of your body, for example, it's a very, very critical part of you. The spine holds your joints, your tendons, your muscles, and the nerve fibers that are contained within that together. And that is why when you get a back injury and you knock your spine out of alignment by, for example, slipping a disc, that's why it's so painful. That's why it affects so much more than just your mobility, but it affects your sleep, your pain threshold, and your ability to move at all. And it's a very useful analogy when it comes to looking at some of the inner gaps that we need to close in terms of alignment in order to be able to perform more freely, perform in a more cohesive way, perform with composure. And you know, this whole aspect of performance is so multidimensional, and so many people only address performance on one level. Now, this is not exhaustive, but here were a couple of things that we addressed by way of closing some spinal points. Spinal points being some key areas where we close the gap using an interval training approach in order to help this young lady. Now, two of the things that she was taught, one of the things, that she was taught erroneously, where she was given instruction, was on the aspect of visualization. And when I asked her how she was taught to visualize, her answer was that she was just told when she was anxious to go and sit in a corner and visualize success. That was the sum total of her instruction. She wasn't shown how to visualize properly. So she was just given instruction in a very sort of telling mode, not a facilitative mode, not a sort of empowerment mode. And so the gap I had to close was from that instruction, which by the way was erroneous, to empowerment, where she knew how to apply it in a way that would really empower her and give her a result. So this was really a knowledge competency gap as well. But I've chosen these two words because they really kind of depict a situation quite aptly. And the other gap that I had to close was, of course, the fear gap, and this is an emotional gap here, a fear gap to one of composure. So that was on the area of the level of her emotions. Now, just to remind you, the methodology I use to close gaps, which is an interval training approach. An interval training approach is very different to a lot of traditional training, and the analogy I used is in case studies before, and I use it again because it's a simple one to use, is that some people, when they go to the gym, they go once a week and do a mammoth workout. That's their idea of a regular workout. And they'll do, say, a 3-4 hour workout, and that's it for the week. And invariably, a lot of those people are taking longer to get any sort of effective results. Now, compare that to scenario 2, where you go either 3 times a week or, say, every other day, and do a shorter workout, 40 minutes, intensive workout, but it's every other day or, 3 days a week. It's that scenario and that person who's going to sculpt their body in terms of fitness with all the health benefits that go with that much more quickly than the first scenario. Why? Because in that kind of approach, which is regular and intensive, you've got frequency and intensity in that. Whereas in the first scenario, you've got intensity, but you haven't got frequency. You've got intensity and volume. And it's not volume that actually increases effectiveness of performance. It's that short, sharp, frequent, intensive drills on a regular basis that really sculpt you very, very quickly. So that's the process I use to close the gap. So I really took Charlotte through proper visualization, which is more like akin to creating a mind movie, but where you're really involved and engaged and can feel what you're visualizing rather than just sitting and visualizing in a very detached mode. So it's training her muscles to really hold the image. And we used a few other techniques in that process, which involved recalling all her successes so she could feel the memory of success again. And then we layered on top of that a very sort of multi-sensory approach to her visualization, so that she could hold the image of her desired outcome. And then with the fear composure gap, I used a proprietary brain integration software. In fact, this was the first gap that I looked to close, because there's a difference between changing, tweaking and adjusting your mindset from a composed place versus a fearful place. So this was actually the first one that we addressed, and through this brain integration software that was customized for her in conjunction with a colleague of mine who specialized in that, we really got her into a more relaxed, aware, composed place, and from that place she carried out these drills. And that brain integration software was really designed to help her take a whole brain approach to applying these things from a relaxed place. So there was two things it really addressed. So she was coming from a more integrated place within her brain, as well as a more composed, relaxed place within her brain, and then applying these drills. And so bear in mind that one of the biggest spinal points that people have the biggest gaps on is this thing called repeated exposure, where they're very familiar with certain concepts. Like a lot of people are aware of visualization. They've been exposed to teaching on visualization, but very few people are either engaging with it frequently or are engaging with it frequently but accurately. And in this case, with this young lady, she wasn't actually familiar with teachings on visualization, but in her case she was engaging in an erroneous way with how she was taught, which was a very limited way of teaching it, and so she was actually applying it incorrectly. And for some people, with some of the drills like visualization, they are applying their knowledge base very incorrectly and getting wrong results, as well as infrequent and wrong results. So we were also, by virtue of addressing those previous two things I showed you on the previous slide here, we were also closing this gap between, exposure to accurate teaching to really engaging with it. And so what was the result of that? The result was actually quite remarkable, and even I was surprised because of the tight timeline here between when we started working and her next national tournament. But 2 weeks later at the national tournament, she came top of her age category, which is equivalent to gold, and she won a bronze medal across all age categories. By that I mean she was competing against people who were in an older age category, and she still got bronze. But as equally important to that, she had regained her composure and control over her body. So the problems she had with her elimination system and the injuries all got erased completely. And then I did some follow-up with her. More recently, she came second at the British Championship, second at the World Trials, and came first at an international tournament in Denmark. Now, the point there is that it doesn't matter how good the system is. If you don't engage with it and don't practice it, it's not going to work. 10 times 0 is 0. What this little girl had in her favour were a couple of things that I really want you to take on board. First of all, she didn't just become familiar with what I taught her. She took that familiarity and engaged with it and paid attention to accurate practice. So she was very teachable and coachable. The other thing is she accepted help. So she had somebody like myself who was expert in this area to help her close the performance gap. Okay, So she didn't mind being vulnerable and asking for help, with a little kind of persuasion from her mother, of course, in the first place. But once she got past that, she was an open door. But the third thing is that, and I really want to underline this as very important, and that's why I chose this case study. She had an open heart and mind, and she was willing to engage and apply the things as I taught her. Now, I come across a lot of adults that have a very rigid mindset. In other words, they're familiar with a lot, but that familiarity has bred contempt, and they're very resistive to actually even owning up to the fact that they're, not applying things properly or not applying things frequently and properly. And then when it comes to certain drills, like visualization or whatever else we might be talking about, there's a resistiveness to really engaging differently in order to get a different result. And you have to knock that one on the head. You have to humble yourself and you have to knock it on the head, because this process works, but it doesn't work against your unwillingness. So this young girl showed willingness, and children are very much more open than adults. They're very much open to things. They're less rigid, they're less resistive. And so this young child can teach us adults a lot when it comes to having an open heart and a mind, an open mind that went with that. She got profoundly different results, and this can be you too. So this is a case study and an example and demonstration of how the UP system, a AAA strategic system, helped address the issue of performance anxiety. Now you translate those principles across to yourself. So which spinal points do you need to close? Are you coming at things from a very highly anxious state? Are you coming at things from a very fearful state? What are you actually doing to close that gap? Are you snatching at the process and just sort of, ploughing on through hoping to get a different result? Or are you taking a step back and redressing the way that you visualize success, the way that you look at yourself in the process, the way that you're thinking about things? Where are your gaps here? More importantly, how can you close them? So I hope that case study has helped. This is Anita and Ryan closing out, and I will speak to you soon. Bye for now.